Say that one more time and you'll answer to me." The entire diner went silent. Dominic Russo, the most feared man in Pittsburgh, had just hurled a coffee cup straight at her head. It exploded against the wall inches from her face. His armed men reached inside their jackets. Every customer stopped breathing and looked away. He controlled construction union city officials and half this city's secrets. She controlled nothing except what she was willing to accept. She looked him dead in the eyes. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. That single sentence changed everything that happened next. Subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story reaches. The rain had been falling on Pittsburgh for 3 straight days. Not the soft, forgiving kind of rain that makes people want to stay in bed with a warm blanket and a good book. This was the kind of rain that felt like a punishment, heavy cold, relentless, the kind that seeped through the soles of your shoes and settled deep into your bones by the time you made it from the parking lot to the front door. The gutters along Fifth Avenue were overflowing. The traffic lights swung on their cables like pendulums counting down to something. And inside the Bellwether Diner, the fluorescent lights buzzed with that familiar tired sound that told you the night was going to be long before it had even properly started. Claire Bennett had already been on her feet for 9 hours. She wasn't thinking about that, though. She rarely did. Thinking about how tired you are is a luxury that belongs to people who have the option of sitting down, and Claire had stopped allowing herself that particular luxury somewhere around the 3rd year of working doubles. She moved between the booths the way she always did, efficiently, quietly, without drama. A coffee refill here, a plate of eggs there, a quick smile for the elderly couple in booth 6, who came in every Tuesday without fail and always ordered the same thing and always tipped exactly 15%, which was fine because they also always said thank you and meant it. The Bellwether Diner was not a glamorous place. It had never been a glamorous place and had no aspirations in that direction. The booths along the window were upholstered in dark red vinyl that had cracked in several places and been repaired with electrical tape. The countertop was a pale yellow laminate that had seen better decades. The menu hadn't changed in 11 years, which was either a mark of tradition or a failure of imagination, depending on who you asked. Ray Collins, the cook, had been making the same meatloaf on Tuesdays since before Claire started working there, and he made it well, and that was enough. What the Bellwether had more than anything else was a kind of stubborn warmth, the kind of warmth that doesn't come from decor or ambiance, but from the specific accumulation of ordinary human moments. The family celebrating a kid's birthday at the big corner table, the night shift nurse who always came in at midnight and ate scrambled eggs in silence because it was the only half hour of her day that belonged entirely to her. The old veterans who gathered in the back booth on Wednesday mornings and argued about baseball and local politics with the cheerful ferocity of men who had nothing left to prove to anyone. It was almost midnight when Dominic Russo walked through the front door. Claire heard him before she saw him, which was how it always worked with men like Dominic. You heard the shift in the room first. The conversations didn't stop immediately. They tapered the way music tapers when someone slowly turns down the volume on a stereo. The laughter in the back booth faded out. The couple by the window leaned slightly closer together. The young couple, arguing quietly over their check, suddenly found a reason to agree. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hold their breath. Dominic Russo was 58 years old, and he moved through the world like a man who had never once in his adult life been told to wait. He was broad across the shoulders, well-dressed in a dark overcoat that shed rainwater as he moved, and his face carried the particular kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from absolute certainty that nothing in your immediate environment poses a threat to you. Behind him came 2 men, large, quiet, wearing the careful blankness of professionals who had spent years practicing how to be visible without being noticed. Claire was halfway through refilling the coffee for table 4 when she saw them. She watched Dominic's eyes move across the diner the way a man scans a room he owns, automatically, efficiently cataloging. Then his eyes landed on the corner booth, the big one, the one with the best sightlines to both the door and the kitchen exit, the one that in the unspoken geography of the Bellwether was understood to belong to him on the nights he chose to come in. Tonight that booth was occupied. The man sitting in it was perhaps 70 years old, maybe older. He was wearing a canvas jacket that had been repaired so many times the repairs had their own repairs. His shoes were wrapped in plastic bags secured with rubber bands to keep the rain out. On the table in front of him sat a cup of coffee, a glass of water, and an untouched plate of toast, the cheapest thing on the Bellwether's menu, which meant it had been ordered by someone who wanted to get warm and stay warm for as long as the social contract of the diner allowed. His name, Claire knew, was Walter. She didn't know his last name. He came in maybe once or twice a month, always on nights when the weather was particularly brutal, always sat quietly, always nursed whatever he'd ordered for as long as he needed to. Ray sometimes sent out an extra plate from the kitchen on those nights, not as charity, which Walter wouldn't accept, but as what Ray called the manager's special, which was a fiction they both maintained with perfect seriousness. Walter had served 2 tours in Vietnam. Claire knew that because he'd told her once, not with pride and not with bitterness, but with the flat matter-of-factness of a man reporting a historical fact. He'd come home to a city that hadn't known what to do with him, a marriage that hadn't survived the distance, and the economy that had eaten through his savings before he'd understood what was happening. He wasn't a tragic figure in his own mind. I was just a man trying to get through another cold Tuesday night. Dominic stopped in the middle of the diner and looked at Walter. Then he looked at Claire. There was something in that look that Claire had seen before, not from Dominic specifically, but from men like him, men who had lived so long inside a world where their wants automatically became facts that they had genuinely lost the ability to distinguish between a preference and a command. He said, "Move him." Just that. 2 words. No greeting, no please, no acknowledgement that she was a person capable of having a perspective on the matter. Move him. Like Walter was a piece of furniture that had been left in the wrong spot. Claire set the coffee pot down on the counter. It made a small, deliberate sound against the laminate. "I'm sorry," she said. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. He was not accustomed to the word sorry functioning as a challenge, and he recognized that it just had. "The man in my booth," he said slowly, "the way you speak to someone you've decided might have difficulty understanding plain English. Move him to another seat." Claire looked at Walter, who had gone very still in the way that people who have spent years being told to disappear learn to go still. Not with fear exactly, but with a kind of preemptive resignation, bracing for the shape of the humiliation before it fully arrived. She looked back at Dominic. "That gentleman is a paying customer," she said. "He got here first. When he's finished, the booth will be available." The silence in the diner deepened to something almost physical. One of Dominic's men shifted his weight. The other one, the one by the door, let his hand drift toward the inside of his jacket in a gesture so practiced it was probably unconscious. Dominic took 3 steps toward the counter. He picked up a coffee cup, not as someone else's left on the counter after being bussed, and he looked at Claire the way a person looks at something they are about to demonstrate a point with. And then he turned and threw it at the wall. It shattered. The fragments hit the tiles about 6 inches from Claire's head. The handle bounced off the counter and skittered across the floor. The remaining coffee made a dark arc against the pale tile before dripping slowly toward the drain. Not one person in the diner made a sound. Ray had appeared in the kitchen window. He was holding a spatula, and his jaw was tight, and his eyes were doing the calculation that every sensible person in the room was doing, weighing the cost of action against the cost of inaction, finding both columns filled with numbers that didn't add up to anything good. Dominic leaned one hand on the counter and looked at Claire. "I won't ask again," he said. And here is the part that no one in that diner, not Ray, not the couple by the window, not the night shift nurse, not even Claire herself could have fully predicted or explained afterward. Claire Bennett didn't move. She didn't reach for the phone. She didn't look at the door. She didn't calculate odds or run scenarios. She had spent 32 years learning when to pick her battles and how to absorb the small humiliations that working-class life hands out with such casual generosity, and something in her, something that had been bending and bending for years under the accumulated weight of hospital bills and double shifts and insurance company form letters, simply stopped bending. She looked at Dominic Russo directly in the eyes, not defiantly, not with performance, with the specific calm of someone who has decided that they are finished pretending. "Say that one more time," she said quietly, "and you'll answer to me." The sentence landed in the silence like a stone dropped in still water. One of Dominic's men laughed a short, startled sound, the kind of laugh that's really just shock wearing a costume. The other one reached fully inside his jacket. Dominic raised one hand flat without looking at either of them. Both men stopped. He was looking at Claire with an expression that no one in the room could quite read. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something more complicated than anger. It was the expression of a man who has just encountered something he wasn't prepared for and doesn't yet know what to do with it. "You understand who I am," he said. It wasn't a question. "I understand what you are," Claire said. "That's not the same thing." "Then you understand," he said carefully, "that this doesn't end well for you." "Maybe not," Claire said, "but it doesn't start well for you either. Because that man in your booth served this country for 2 tours when he was 19 years old, and he's been treated like he's invisible for the 30 years since. And if you think I'm going to stand here and tell him to move so you can have a better view of the parking lot, then you've badly misjudged what kind of place this is." Dominic said nothing. "Fear doesn't make you important," Claire continued, and her voice was steady in a way that surprised even her. "It just makes everyone around you dishonest. You don't actually know what a single person in this room thinks of you. You only know what they're willing to say to your face." The silence stretched. "That's my cup you threw," she said, gesturing toward the pieces on the floor. "It's $4. Something shifted in Dominic Russo's face. It moved so quickly that most of the people in the room missed it. But Ray saw it, and Walter from the corner booth saw it, and Claire, who was looking directly at him, saw it most clearly. It was not shame. It was something older and more complicated than shame. It was the flicker of a man recognizing for just a moment the true shape of what he had become as seen through the eyes of someone who had nothing to gain from flattering him. He reached into the breast pocket of his coat. Everyone in the diner tensed. He produced a leather wallet, and from it took a single $5 bill. He placed it on the counter with 2 fingers carefully, the way you place something you want to make sure stays put. "Keep the change," he said. Then he straightened, turned, and walked toward the door. His men followed both of them, wearing the expressions of people who have just witnessed something they will be trying to make sense of for a long time. Dominic paused with one hand on the door. He didn't turn around. He didn't say anything. He just paused for exactly 2 seconds, as if something inside him wanted to, and then he pushed through into the rain. The convoy of vehicles outside the diner pulled away 30 seconds later. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Walter very quietly from the corner booth said, "Thank you, miss." And Claire said, "You're welcome, Walter," because she knew his name, and she had always known his name, and she believed that was the minimum. And then she walked to the back into the employee bathroom, locked the door, sat down on the floor with her back against the wall, and began shaking so hard she had to press both hands flat on the linoleum to keep herself grounded. She stayed there for 11 minutes. She counted them. When she came back out, Ray was sweeping up the broken pieces of the cup without being asked. He looked at her once. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She finished her shift. That was at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and by the time Claire got to her car, it was past 1 in the morning, and the rain had not let up at all. She sat behind the wheel for a while without starting the engine. Her hands were still not entirely steady. She looked at the lights of the diner through the rain-blurred windshield, that warm, stubborn, imperfect light pushing through the glass, and she thought about the $5 bill still sitting in her apron pocket, and about Walter finishing his toast in peace, and about the look on Dominic Russo's face in the half-second before he put down the money. She didn't know yet what it meant. She only knew that something had changed in that room, and that whatever it was, it had not finished changing. She drove home through empty streets through the rain that kept falling like a statement about the nature of this particular city, and when she let herself into the apartment, it was past 2 o'clock, and the living room lamp was still on, because her mother never went to sleep until she heard the key in the door. Helen Bennett was 67 years old and had spent the better part of 4 decades being the kind of woman who filled whatever room she was in with a particular quality of attentiveness, the sense that she was genuinely, specifically interested in you and what you were carrying, not as performance, not as politeness, but as the natural expression of a character that found other people perpetually worth understanding. Even now, in the 2 years since her heart condition had begun its slow, patient work of narrowing her world, she retained that quality. She was smaller than she had been, and some days the tiredness settled into her face in ways that Claire could read with the particular fluency you develop when you love someone closely and for a long time. But her eyes were still completely, utterly present. She looked at Claire from the armchair where she'd been waiting, and she said, "Sit down, sweetheart." Not what happened and not are you all right, just sit down, which was exactly right, and Claire sat on the couch and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding since approximately 11:47 p.m. "There was a man at the diner tonight," Claire said. Helen waited. "He threw a cup at the wall, near my head." Claire paused. "I didn't walk away." Helen's expression didn't change in the way Claire half expected it to. No alarm, no immediate pivot toward safety advice. She just looked at her daughter steadily. "What did you do?" "I told him to say it again, and I meant it." "Who was the man?" Claire told her. Helen was quiet for a moment. The lamp made a small warm circle on the carpet between them, and outside the rain was still saying what rain says to sleeping cities. "Were you afraid?" Helen asked. "I'm still afraid," Claire said. "My hands were shaking the whole time. They didn't stop until maybe an hour ago." "Being afraid doesn't mean you were wrong," Helen said. She reached over and took Claire's hand. Her fingers were still warm, still the same hands Claire had been holding onto since she was a small child, bringing home drawings from school and small catastrophes of scraped knees and broken friendships. "Watch what he does next. That's the part that will tell you what kind of man he chooses to be." Claire didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed in the dark and listened to the rain and waited for the sound of cars pulling up outside, for headlights sliding across her bedroom ceiling, for the particular silence that precedes something terrible. Nothing came. The hours moved through their usual order. The rain eased sometime around 4. By 5, the sky had gone from black to the specific shade of gray that means dawn is deciding whether to show up. She finally stopped waiting and admitted to herself that she was not going to sleep. She made coffee instead and sat at the kitchen table with Helen's medical files spread out in front of her, though she wasn't really reading them. She'd read them so many times she could recite whole sections from memory. The diagnosis, the treatment options, the one experimental treatment that the specialist had said carefully, with the practiced precision of someone who has learned to offer hope with one hand and retreat from it with the other, could significantly extend her mother's life, could stabilize the progression, could buy years instead of months. The insurance company had denied it twice. The word they used was experimental, and the way they used it made it sound like a moral failing on the part of whoever had invented the treatment. Claire had appealed both denials. She'd filled out forms that seemed specifically designed to discourage completion forms that asked for information that then required additional forms to obtain forms that referenced other forms that referenced the first form in a closed loop of bureaucratic futility. She'd made phone calls that averaged 47 minutes on hold before reaching representatives who were personally sympathetic and institutionally powerless. She was more than $90,000 short of covering the treatment privately. She had sold the good jewelry. She had sold the car she'd been planning to buy and kept driving the one that was held together partly by willpower. She had picked up extra shifts until she could no longer reliably count on her feet to take her where she pointed them. She had applied for 3 different financial assistance programs and been denied by 2 and was still waiting on the 3rd. She sat at the kitchen table in the gray pre-dawn and did the math again and arrived at the same answer she always arrived at, and then set the files aside and drank her coffee. At 8 a.m. she was back at the bellwether for her opening shift. At 2:17 p.m. Dominic Russo walked through the front door. He came alone. That was the first thing Claire noticed. No bodyguards, no convoy, no theater of consequence. Just a man in a coat coming through a door in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon the way anybody might. He sat at the counter, not at the corner booth, not at the most strategically defensible table in the room, but at the counter like an ordinary customer. He ordered coffee. He said, "Please." Claire poured it. They looked at each other across the counter. "I want you to know," he said, "that what happened last night won't come back on you, or anyone else who was here." "I'm not interested in your promises," Claire said. "That's fair," he said. She waited. "I came back," he said, "because I wanted to see if I'd imagined it." "Imagined what?" "Someone speaking to me like that, like I was just a person." He picked up the coffee cup carefully this time, deliberately. "It's been a long time." Claire studied him the way she studied everyone, not with judgment, not with warmth, but with the particular careful attention of someone who has learned that people are rarely exactly what they first appear to be. What she saw was a man who was tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep, tired in the way that comes from spending decades building something and only recently beginning to look directly at what you've actually built. "I want to know your name," he said. "No," she said. He blinked. "Names are given to people who have earned trust," she said. "You haven't, not even close." He absorbed this. "And what does earning trust look like to you?" "It looks different than one afternoon of good behavior," she said, and refilled his coffee without being asked, because that was her job, and she was good at her job regardless of who she was doing it for. He paid his bill. He left a normal tip, not ostentatious, not pointed, just normal. He put on his coat, and as he reached the door, he stopped and turned and looked at her. "Tomorrow," he said. She didn't answer, but he came back the next day, and the day after that. And on the third day, without quite deciding to, Claire found herself talking to him for real. Not the sharp surface-level exchange of the counter, but something slower and more complicated. The kind of conversation that happens between people who are both trying to figure out whether they can trust the person in front of them and finding against all reasonable expectation that the answer might be more complicated than a simple no. She told him about Helen, not because she decided to, but because he asked about the files she was reviewing on her break. The same insurance denial letters she carried everywhere now, in case she found a moment to make another call, and the question was asked with a directness that bypassed the usual social buffers, and she was too tired to construct a polite deflection. She told him about the diagnosis and the treatment and the $90,000 and the insurance company that had developed in her mind the specific personality of an entity that had decided human suffering was simply a category of risk to be managed rather than a category of experience to be responded to. Dominic listened without interrupting. This was notable. In Claire's experience, powerful people listened primarily to gather information they could use. They listened the way you listen to a presentation before you decide whether to fund it. Dominic listened the way someone listens when they are genuinely trying to understand something they have previously failed to understand. When she finished, he said, "I can solve that." "No," she said immediately. "It's not a complicated—" "No," she said again. "I know what solving things looks like when it comes from a man like you. It looks like a favor, and favors become debts, and debts become chains. And I would rather fight the insurance company for another year than owe you anything." He was quiet for a moment. "You think I'm trying to buy you," he said. "I think you've spent so long in a world where everything is transactional that you might not even realize you're doing it," Claire said. "I think generosity looks different when it comes from someone who isn't keeping score. I think you probably haven't had a lot of people in your life who weren't keeping score." Dominic looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face, that same flicker she'd seen the first night, the recognition of an accurate description, landing with the particular discomfort of truth. "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 8 years, he said. Claire didn't say anything. "She left Pittsburgh when she was 26. She figured out earlier than I wanted to admit she could figure it out what the world I'd built actually was, what it cost. She changed her name after she got married. I have a grandson I've never met." He paused. "His name is Noah. He's 5. Claire set down the coffee pot. "My son stayed," Dominic continued. "Adrian, he stayed and he became what I needed him to become, to run things after me. He's good at it." A pause. "He's better at it than I ever was." "That doesn't sound like pride," Claire said. "It's not," Dominic said. "Not anymore." They sat with that for a moment, the weight of what he'd said occupying the space between them like something solid. "I built an empire so my children would never feel powerless," Dominic said. "One of them ran away from it as fast as she could. The other one—" He stopped. "I look at Adrian sometimes and I think I was trying to protect my children, and what I actually did was show them that power is the only thing worth having. That fear is the only language that matters." He looked at his hands. Olivia understood it was wrong. Adrian understood it was effective. "I'm not sure which of them is more right." "Why are you telling me this?" Claire asked. He looked up. "Because you're the first person I've talked to in years who isn't either afraid of me or working for me, and apparently I had things to say." Claire looked at him for a long moment, at the tiredness in his face, at the thing underneath the tiredness that she was beginning reluctantly, and with considerable caution, to identify as something like genuine grief. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Not strategically, not what you think sounds good. What do you actually want from whatever this is?" Dominic was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "I want to know if it's possible to stop being what I am. I want to know if at 58 years old, with the kind of ledger I've accumulated, if there's actually still a direction called forward." Claire picked up the coffee pot. That, she said, is the first honest thing you've said to me since you walked through that door. She refilled his cup. Forward exists, she said, but it doesn't look like what you're imagining. It doesn't look like one big gesture that balances the scales. It looks like 1,000 small things done right when doing them wrong would be easier. It looks like one shop owner whose business you didn't burn. It looks like one contractor who gets out from under a debt you could have collected. It looks like your grandson someday knowing your name without being afraid of it. Dominic looked at her. His jaw tightened slightly, not with anger, but with the specific tightness of a man receiving something he wanted and finding it harder to hold than he expected. You make it sound simple, he said. I make it sound possible, Claire corrected him. Those aren't the same thing. He came back 4 days later. He took the same stool. He ordered the same coffee. He told her he had made some calls. There were several shop owners in the Hill District whose property had been targeted for acquisition through methods that the men executing them had always described to themselves as business, and Claire would describe as extortion. He had canceled the operation. There was a contractor named Marcus Gaines who had been trapped in a debt arrangement for 3 years, unable to pay, unable to walk away, a man who went to bed every night calculating how far down he was and waking up each morning to find the number hadn't changed. Dominic had ordered the debt released. No payment, no conditions, just you're free. Claire listened. Why are you telling me? She asked. Because you said forward looks like 1,000 small things, he said. I'm trying to count them. She looked at him for a long moment. The diner was mid-afternoon quiet around them. Ray was humming something indistinct in the kitchen. The fluorescent light that had been flickering for 2 weeks was finally steady. 3 things, she said. Keep going. He did. And in the specific alchemy of that strange, improbable, ongoing conversation between a feared man trying to learn a language he had never been taught, and an exhausted woman who had gotten so tired of being made to feel small that she had accidentally stopped accepting it as inevitable, something began to shift that neither of them had any particular plan for, and neither of them would have been able to stop even if they'd tried. But change rarely asks permission, and it almost never waits until a convenient time. It was already in motion. And somewhere across the city, in an office that smelled like leather and expensive ambition, Dominic's son Adrian was beginning to notice. 3 weeks after Dominic Russo walked into the Bellwether Diner and placed a $5 bill on the counter, like a man who had just learned something he hadn't expected to learn, he came back on a Wednesday morning and ordered oatmeal. Not coffee, not the kind of heavy meal that men who are performing power tend to order. Oatmeal, with brown sugar on the side. He sat at the counter with his coat folded neatly on the stool beside him, and he ate it slowly, and he said good morning to Ray through the kitchen window, and Ray, who had spent the better part of 30 years reading people the way you read weather, with the patient precision of someone whose comfort depends on getting the forecast right, looked at Claire and said nothing, which was itself a kind of statement. Claire refilled Dominic's water without being asked and went back to her other tables. This was how it had been going, twice a week, sometimes 3 times. Always at the counter or in a small booth near the back, never the corner seat he used to command. Always alone, no bodyguards, no theater. He ate what was on the menu. He paid what was on the check. He left a reasonable tip, never the kind of tip that makes a statement, never the kind that makes you feel like you've been purchased. Just a normal tip from a man practicing being normal. Claire was not naive about this. She was 32 years old, and she had spent those 32 years in circumstances that had given her an extremely well-calibrated detector for the difference between a person who had changed and a person who was performing change for an audience. She watched him the way her mother had taught her to watch people, not for what they said, but for what they did when they thought no one was paying attention. He didn't threaten the busboy who bumped into him and spilled water on his sleeve. He didn't demand faster service when the lunch rush backed up and his order took 20 minutes. When a woman at the counter next to him recognized him, Claire saw it happen, the widening of the eyes, the instinct to look away. He said quietly, "I'm just having lunch," and turned back to his food, and that was it. No menace, no implicit reminder of what he was capable of. Just a man asking to be left alone to eat his lunch. That was not nothing, but she still hadn't told him her name. It was on a Thursday the 4th week that the conversation shifted into territory that neither of them had been planning for. Helen had had a difficult night. Her heart had done the thing it occasionally did now, the arrhythmia that the cardiologist described in technical language that translated in practical terms to Claire, sitting beside her mother's bed at 3 a.m., counting heartbeats and trying to remember how to breathe normally. By the time morning came, Helen was stable and embarrassed about the fuss and absolutely insistent that Claire go to work. Because Helen Bennett had survived 67 years on this earth, partly through the discipline of not allowing her difficulties to become other people's paralysis. Claire went to work. She moved through the morning on the specific autopilot of the sleep-deprived functional competent and operating about 4 emotional layers below the surface. She didn't notice Dominic watching her until he said, "You're not here today." She looked at him. "I'm standing right in front of you." "Your hands are," he said. "The rest of you is somewhere else." She considered denying it. She considered the various professional deflections she had developed over years of customer service, and then she was just too tired to use any of them. "My mother had a bad night," she said. "She's okay, but it reminded me that okay isn't a permanent condition. It's just a description of the current moment." Dominic was quiet for a moment. "What does she need medically?" "You've asked me that before. You deflected before." "I had reasons." "Do you still have them?" Claire looked at him. The diner was in that mid-morning lull between the breakfast rush and the lunch crowd, and the light through the windows was doing the ordinary work of light in a room that had seen too many conversations like this one. Conversations conducted in the spaces between tasks, between one crisis and the next, in the 10 minutes available before the world reasserts its demands. She told him about the treatment, the full version, not the abbreviated one she'd given him weeks ago. The experimental cardiac intervention that the specialist had described as her mother's best option. The cost, the 2 insurance denials, the appeals that had been built so carefully and rejected so efficiently that she had begun to wonder whether the people on the other end were reading the words she sent or simply processing them through an algorithm that had been designed to find reasons to say no. Dominic listened with his hands flat on the counter, a posture she had come to recognize as his version of attention. When she finished, he said, "Let me pay for it." "No," Claire said. "Claire?" She stopped. Then she stopped again because she had just told him her name, not as a gift, not as a decision, as a reflex. Because apparently somewhere in the past 4 weeks, her nervous system had quietly reclassified him in a category that warranted a name. He noticed. He had the discipline not to make anything of it. "Claire," he said again carefully, like he understood the weight of it. "I have legitimate charitable accounts, money that has been through proper channels and is legally clean. I can make sure your mother gets her treatment, and no one needs to know where the money came from." "I need to know," Claire said. "That's the problem. Not the legality of the account, the origin of the money, the favors it represents, the history it carries. If I take money from you, even clean money, even charity, what do I owe you? And before you say nothing, I want you to think very carefully about whether that's true." Dominic was quiet for a long moment. "You think accepting my help makes you part of my world," he said. "I think accepting your help makes me someone who owes you something," Claire said. "Maybe it's gratitude, maybe it's loyalty, maybe it's just the expectation that I'll extend good faith to you in a situation where I should be skeptical. I don't know what form it takes, but I know that in your world, nothing is actually free. I've watched you long enough to know that you understand transactions in a way that runs deep, and I don't want to be a transaction." Dominic sat back. Something in his expression moved through a sequence that she watched with care, first what looked like frustration, then something that looked like genuine consideration, and then something that she would only later recognize as respect. "There's a foundation," he said. "Harbor Light Medical Foundation. It's run by an attorney named Daniel Ward. It's been independently audited every year for the past 9 years. It accepts applications from families in medical crisis. It doesn't know who I am, and I have no authority over individual cases." He paused. "I donate to it. I've donated to it for years, not because it benefits me, and not because anyone knows I do. Because a woman I cared about a long time ago couldn't afford her cancer treatment, and she died, and I had more money than God by that point, and I hadn't been paying attention, and I didn't find out until afterward." He stopped. "Daniel Ward helped me set up the account. The foundation is real and it's clean, and your mother can apply through the same process as every other family." Claire looked at him. "Why didn't you tell me this weeks ago?" she asked. "Because weeks ago, you would have said no before I finished the sentence," he said. "And you would have been right to, because weeks ago, I would have been offering it as leverage. I wanted you to see that I understood the difference." He met her eyes. "I'm still not sure I do understand it, but I'm trying to." Claire was quiet. "I'll look it up," she said finally. "The foundation. I'll verify it independently. And if it's what you say it is, I'll apply through the proper process, not as a favor to you, as help that my mother is entitled to receive." "That's all I'm asking," Dominic said. "Don't make it sound like humility," Claire said. "You're asking me to believe you. That's not a small thing." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She spent the next 2 days researching Harbor Light Medical Foundation with the thoroughness of someone who had been lied to by institutions before and had learned to read the fine print of everything. She called Daniel Ward, who turned out to be a quiet, precisely spoken man in his mid-50s, who answered her questions with the patience of someone who understood exactly why she was asking them. She verified the audits. She read the application materials. She called 2 families who had received assistance and spoke with them for a combined total of 90 minutes listening, not for what they said about the foundation, but for what they didn't say, the hesitations, the qualifications, the things people communicate when they're being careful about an organization they feel ambivalent about. She heard none of those things. She filed the application on a Saturday morning with Helen sitting beside her at the kitchen table reading each section before Claire submitted it, asking the precise, careful questions of a woman who had spent her working life as a school librarian and had never lost the habit of reading things closely. "This looks real," Helen said. "It is real," Claire said. "How did you find it?" Claire paused. "Someone told me about it." Helen looked at her in the way that mothers look at daughters when they've received a partial answer and are deciding how hard to push. "The man from the diner," she said. "He doesn't control it. He just donates to it." Helen was quiet for a moment. "And you trust that—" "I verified it," Claire said. "I don't trust him. I trust the documentation." Helen reached over and covered Claire's hand with hers. "Sweetheart, those might be the same thing." Claire looked at her mother. "Sometimes," Helen said gently, "people show you who they're trying to become before they fully get there, and you have to decide whether to respond to the person who is arriving or to wait until they've completed the journey." She paused. "I'm not telling you what to decide. I'm telling you what I see." Claire looked back at the screen, at the submitted application, at the case number that represented her mother's life, translated into a form that a foundation could process. "I'll respond to the documentation," she said, "and I'll keep watching." 3 weeks after the application, Helen was approved for treatment. The specialist at UPMC, who had been following her case, called on a Tuesday afternoon while Claire was on her lunch break and said the words that Claire had been wanting to hear for so long that she had begun to lose the ability to imagine them as a real possibility. She sat in the small employee break room with the phone pressed to her ear and listened to the doctor's careful, professional optimism and felt something in her chest slowly, cautiously begin to release. She finished her shift. She drove home. She sat at the kitchen table across from Helen and told her. Helen cried, not dramatically. She was not a dramatic woman. She cried the way people cry when they've been holding their breath for a very long time and something finally tells them they can let it out quietly and with a kind of bewildered relief. Claire held her hand and let her cry and thought about the strange, improbable chain of events that had led from a broken coffee cup on a Tuesday night to this moment, and she thought about the complicated moral geography of it, and she decided that the geography was what it was, and she had navigated it the best she could, and her mother was going to get her treatment, and that was the thing that mattered most. She told Dominic the next morning. She didn't make it a moment. She didn't frame it as gratitude or as validation of his character or as anything other than what it was. She came in, poured his coffee, and said, "My mother was approved for the treatment." Dominic looked at her. "Good," he said. "Thank you for telling me about the foundation," she said. "I want to be clear that I'm thanking you for information, not for the outcome. The foundation made its own decision." "I know the difference," he said. "I'm not sure you do yet," she said. "But you're getting there." Something moved across his face that might have been a smile if it had gone a little further. He drank his coffee. He paid his check. He left a normal tip. It was 2 days after that conversation, in the middle of a quiet Thursday afternoon, that Dominic did something Claire hadn't expected. He came in looking different. Not physically, he was dressed the same way he always dressed, but in some quality of the air around him, some shift in the weight of what he was carrying. He sat down, and he didn't order anything for a full minute. Claire set a coffee cup in front of him and waited. "I've been talking to a federal prosecutor," he said. The diner was quiet enough that she heard the ice maker in the back rumble to life and fall quiet again. "Her name is Rebecca Sloan," he said. "She's been building a case for years. I've been adjacent to information that would help that case significantly. Financial records, names, transactions." He stopped. "I've been providing her with documentation." Claire looked at him very carefully. "Since when?" she asked. "About 3 weeks ago," he said. "I started thinking about what you said, about what forward looks like. And I decided that forward has to include something real, not just canceling a few operations and releasing a contractor from debt. It has to include something that costs me something I can't get back." Claire set the coffee pot down. "Do you understand what this means?" she asked. "For you, for your organization." "I understand it exactly," he said. "And you understand that if the people in your organization find out before the process is complete, I understand that too," he said. Claire looked at him, at the steadiness in his face, at the tiredness underneath the steadiness, at the thing underneath the tiredness that she had been watching develop across weeks of counter-conversations and oatmeal and reasonable tips. The thing she had been trying to name precisely because precision matters when the stakes are high, and she had finally decided that the most accurate name for it was courage. Not the spectacular kind, the grinding, daily, costly kind, the kind that doesn't feel like bravery because it feels too much like loss. "The men who built their fortunes around your silence," she said. "Yes," he said. "They're not going to accept this quietly." "No," he said. "They're not." She looked at him for a long moment. "Are you afraid?" "Yes," he said without any hesitation or performance, just the plain word. "But I'm thinking about what you told me. That fear doesn't mean you were wrong." Claire felt something shift in her chest. "I said that to you a long time ago," she said. "I know," he said. "I wrote it down." She was still thinking about that when Adrian Russo walked through the door that evening. Claire was closing out the register, and Ray was scrubbing the grill, and the last customer had left 20 minutes ago. The front door was unlocked because she hadn't gotten to it yet, and that was the only reason Adrian was able to walk through it, the way he did not, knocking, not announcing himself, just stepping inside with the ease of a man who had spent his entire life moving through spaces as though they had been cleared for him in advance. She recognized him immediately. She had seen photos, not that she'd been looking for them, but Pittsburgh was a city with a certain density of local history, and Dominic's family occupied a significant portion of it. Adrian was 33, and he looked like his father, the way a sharpened knife looks like the raw metal. It was made from the essential material was the same, but the process of refinement had removed everything soft. He was handsome in a way that was probably very effective in certain situations, and in this situation felt like a warning. He stood in the middle of the diner and looked around with the expression of a man reviewing an asset that has been mismanaged. "You're Claire," he said. "We're closed," she said. "I'm not here to eat," he said. Ray appeared in the kitchen window. Claire made the smallest possible hand gesture, the one that meant stay where you are, and Ray stayed, though he didn't disappear. Adrian walked to the counter and sat on the same stool his father used. It was a deliberate choice. Claire was certain of it. "My father has been coming here," he said. "A lot of people come here," she said. "Not to talk," Adrian said. "He comes here to talk, to you. He's been talking to you in ways he hasn't talked to anyone in possibly ever." He tilted his head slightly. "Do you understand what you've done to him?" "I've had coffee with him," Claire said. "I've been honest with him. I haven't done anything to him." "You've made him soft," Adrian said. The word came out like something he found genuinely contemptible. He canceled operations. He released debt arrangements that took years to establish. He's been moving money out of ventures that are, let's say, not entirely legal. He paused. And he's been meeting with Rebecca Sloan. The air in the room changed. Claire kept her expression level. She was very good at keeping her expression level. She had been doing it under pressure since she was a teenager. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Adrian looked at her with the patient expression of someone who has heard that sentence used as a strategy many times and is not even slightly inconvenienced by it. "I'm not here to threaten you," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not my father from 3 months ago. I don't throw coffee cups. He let that land. I'm here to tell you something as a courtesy, because you seem like someone who thinks she understands the situation she's in, and I don't believe you actually do. Then explain it to me, Claire said. My father is not a project, Adrian said. He's not a wounded animal you've rehabilitated. He's a man who has spent 3 decades building something that involves a very large number of people who have a very significant investment in how he behaves. And when a person at the center of that kind of structure begins to change, when he starts making decisions that threaten the stability of everything the people around him have built, those people don't ask questions, they take action. He stood up. You think you've helped him, Adrian said. What you've actually done is make him a target. He was protected when he behaved like himself. Now that he's behaving like something else, something smaller, something that apologizes and releases debts and talks to federal prosecutors, he's vulnerable in ways he's never been vulnerable before. He looked at her steadily. And you're standing next to him. Claire looked back at him. Is that a threat? She asked. It's a description, Adrian said. What you do with a description is up to you. He turned to go. At the door, he stopped. He didn't turn around. Stay away from him, he said, or you'll be standing beside him when he falls. The door closed. Ray appeared from the kitchen in about 4 seconds faster than Claire would have expected a man of his size to move. He looked at the door and then at Claire. You okay? He said. Yeah, she said. And then more honestly, I don't know. Who was that? His son, she said. Ray looked at her with the expression of a man processing a piece of information that confirms a suspicion he would have preferred to remain unconfirmed. What did he want? To tell me I don't understand what I'm involved in, Claire said. Do you? She thought about it. About Dominic at the counter talking about Rebecca Sloan with the particular steadiness of a man who had made a decision that couldn't be unmade. About the financial records being transferred. About the network of people who had built their security around Dominic's silence and who would not accept the end of that silence without a response. I understand more than he thinks, she said. That's not an answer to what I asked, Ray said. Claire picked up the coffee pot and looked at it. No, she said. Probably not. She called Daniel Ward that night from her car. She told him what Adrian had said without editorializing, just the facts in order. Daniel listened and asked 2 precise questions and said he would be in contact with Rebecca Sloan's office in the morning. He told her to document anything she noticed: unusual vehicles, unfamiliar faces, anything that felt wrong. She asked him directly, "Is Dominic in danger?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. The people who are afraid of his testimony have resources and motivation, he said. Yes, he's in danger. From his own organization, she said. From the parts of it that have the most to lose, Daniel said, which includes people above him, not just below. Claire sat in the car for a long time after the call ended. She thought about what Helen had said, about responding to the person who is arriving rather than waiting for them to complete the journey. She thought about Adrian's face, not the controlled surface of it, but what she'd seen in the last half-second before he turned away. The thing she'd almost missed because it came and went so fast. Something that looked in that brief window not like menace but like fear. A different kind of fear than his father's. Not the fear of a man facing consequences, but the fear of a man who has been inside a structure for so long that he genuinely cannot imagine existing outside of it. A man who had been handed his identity at birth and had worn it for 33 years and didn't know what he was without it. She thought about that for a long time. The next morning, Dominic came in for coffee, and she looked at him across the counter and said, "Your son came to see me last night." The stillness that came over Dominic's face was different from his usual stillness. This was not the controlled quiet of a man who has chosen to be unreadable. This was the stillness of genuine impact, the kind that happens when news arrives that you've been expecting for a long time, and it still lands harder than you were prepared for. "What did he say?" Dominic asked. Claire told him. Dominic was quiet for a long time. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands, a gesture she had come to recognize as the physical expression of whatever process he used to think through things he hadn't decided yet. "He's not wrong," Dominic said finally, "about the risk. He's wrong about the cause of it. The risk isn't you. The risk is the choice I made. But he doesn't know how to separate those things yet because in his world, choices don't happen in isolation. They always have a source. And you're the most visible change in my life, so you become the explanation." "He's afraid you're going to fall," Claire said, "and take him with you." Dominic looked up. "Yes," he said. "Is he right?" Claire asked. "About the falling part." "Almost certainly," Dominic said. "And you're going forward anyway." He looked at her with an expression that was so stripped of performance that it was almost uncomfortable to look at directly. "I've spent 30 years making decisions based on what I could gain, what I could control, what I could make people afraid of. I need to know what it feels like to make a decision based on something else." He stopped, "Even if it's the last one." Claire picked up his coffee cup and refilled it. "Then you need to be very careful," she said. "And you need to tell Rebecca Sloan everything, not in installments, everything." "I know," he said. "And you need to understand," she said, "that Adrian coming here was a warning, not just to me, to you." "I know that too," he said. "What are you going to do?" Dominic wrapped both hands around the warm cup and looked at the counter and then back at her. "I'm going to finish what I started," he said, "whatever that costs." Claire looked at him. For the first time since a rainy Tuesday night 3 months ago, when a man threw a coffee cup at her head and everything quietly began to shift, she believed him completely. Not because he'd become a good man, not yet, maybe not entirely ever, but because she could see clearly and without the distortion of either fear or excessive hope that he was a man in genuine motion, moving towards something he couldn't fully see yet, moving at a cost he wasn't minimizing, moving because he had finally, at 58 years old, decided that the direction he'd been going in for 3 decades was one he could no longer follow. That was not nothing. That was in fact the hardest possible thing. She picked up her order pad and went to her next table, and behind her, Dominic Russo sat at the counter of the Bellwether Diner and drank his coffee and thought about his son and his daughter and a grandson named Noah, who had no idea that his grandfather existed, and somewhere across the city, people who had built empires on silence were beginning to understand that the silence was ending. And none of them were ready for what came next. Dominic disappeared on a Monday. Claire knew it was a Monday because she had been expecting him on Tuesday for their usual mid-morning conversation, and when he didn't show, she told herself it was nothing. Men like Dominic had lives that moved in directions she wasn't privy to. He didn't owe her a schedule. She poured coffee for her other customers and went through the motions of a normal shift and told herself 3 separate times that the tightness in her chest was not what she thought it was. I didn't come on Thursday either. She called Daniel Ward on Friday morning from the break room with the door closed. Daniel answered on the second ring, which was unusual. He was typically in meetings until noon. "Have you heard from him?" she asked. A pause, short but long enough. "Not directly," Daniel said. "Rebecca's office has been trying to reach him through the usual channels since Wednesday. They're not alarmed yet, but they're attentive." "What does attentive mean?" "It means they're watching," Daniel said. "Claire, this kind of thing happens sometimes when someone in his position is cooperating. They go quiet for a stretch while things are being renegotiated internally. It doesn't automatically mean something has gone wrong." "But it could," she said. Another pause. "Yes," he said. "It could." She hung up and stood in the break room for a moment with her phone in both hands. Then she went back out and refilled coffee and smiled at the couple in booth 4 and said yes, the meatloaf was good today. Ray had made it fresh this morning, and the tightness in her chest stayed exactly where it was for the rest of the shift. The first car she didn't recognize appeared outside her apartment building on Saturday. It was a dark sedan parked 2 spots down from the building entrance, engine off. There was a man in the driver's seat. She noticed him when she came back from the grocery store at 11 in the morning because he was there, and then she noticed him again at 2 in the afternoon when she took out her recycling, and when she came back from the recycling bins, he was still there. Not reading, not on his phone, just sitting, watching the building entrance with the particular focused stillness of someone who is being paid to watch. She went upstairs and told Helen there was a man outside she didn't recognize and that Helen should keep the door locked and not open it for anyone she didn't know. Helen asked no questions. Helen had been married to a man who worked nights in a steel mill for 22 years and had raised a daughter who worked in the kinds of neighborhoods where you learn to read the difference between ordinary stillness and purposeful stillness, and she understood the information being communicated without needing the full explanation. "Are you safe?" Helen asked. "Right now, yes," Claire said. "I'm going to make a call." She called Daniel again. This time she described the car and the man in detail, make, model, approximate color, the direction he was facing, the number of times she'd seen him in the same position. Daniel told her to write it down with timestamps and send it to the email address he gave her. She did that, and then he asked whether she'd noticed anything unusual at the diner. She thought about it. There had been a man on Wednesday who ordered a coffee and sat by the window for almost an hour without eating, which was unusual because people who came to the Bellwether to sit without eating typically didn't sit for an hour unless they were waiting for someone, and this man was not waiting for anyone. He'd been reading a newspaper, or performing the act of reading a newspaper, in the way that people perform an activity when the activity is not actually the point, she told Daniel. "Okay," he said. His voice had changed slightly, not alarmed but more focused. "I'm going to contact Rebecca's office now. In the meantime, I want you to go to work, maintain your normal routine, and don't do anything that signals you're aware of the surveillance. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said, because she could. She had been performing normalcy under pressure for long enough that it had become a skill she could access deliberately, the way you access a tool you've used so many times, it fits naturally in your hand. "And Claire," Daniel said, "Dominic left something with me before he went quiet. An emergency contact protocol, a number that goes directly to Rebecca Sloan. He told me that if anything happened at the diner at your apartment, anything, I was to make sure you had it." The tightness in her chest tightened further. "He knew this might happen," she said. "He planned for it," Daniel said. "There's a difference." She wrote the number on a piece of paper and put it in her apron pocket, where she put things that needed to stay close. The second week without Dominic was harder than the first in ways she hadn't anticipated. Not because she missed the conversations, though she did, in the way you miss something that had quietly become necessary without you fully noticing. It was harder because his absence had a texture to it, a specific quality of wrong that she felt differently from simply not hearing from someone. It felt like the absence of someone who was in trouble. And she had gotten to know him well enough by now to know that he would not have gone quiet without reason. She watched the diner. 2 different unfamiliar cars appeared over 4 days, both with single occupants, both sitting longer than customers normally sat, both leaving without doing anything overt. She documented all of it with timestamps and sent the documentation to Daniel, who forwarded it to Rebecca's office, and Rebecca's office said they were monitoring the situation. Ray noticed the cars on Tuesday of the second week. He mentioned it at the end of the shift with the careful indirectness of a man who wants to communicate something serious without making it more frightening than it already is. "Those 2 cars out there," he said, scrubbing the grill with his back to her. "They've been out there 3 days." "I know," Claire said. "You want to tell me what's going on?" She told him. Not everything, not the Rebecca Sloan piece, because that wasn't hers to share, but enough. The cooperation, the risk, the fact that Dominic had been quiet for nearly 2 weeks, and that the cars outside were probably connected to people who had reasons to be unhappy about his choices. Ray was quiet through all of it. He was a man who had served in the army in his 20s and come home and spent 30 years cooking in a diner and had seen enough varieties of human difficulty that very little caused him to visibly react. But when she finished, he turned around and looked at her directly. "You should have told me sooner," he said. "I didn't want to—" "Claire." His voice was not sharp, but it was firm. "I've been here longer than you have. This place has been through things you don't know about. And I will tell you right now that whatever you're dealing with, you do not deal with it alone. That is not a suggestion." She looked at him. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said, and turned back to the grill. It was 17 days after Dominic disappeared that the back door of the Bellwether opened at 11:43 at night. Claire was alone in the front, wiping down the counter after the last customer had left. Ray had stayed later than usual. She'd been dimly aware of him moving around in the kitchen, taking longer with the cleanup than he normally did, and she'd understood without discussing it that he was doing it on purpose. But he had stepped out to the alley 10 minutes ago to take out the final trash bags, and the diner was quiet, and she was wiping down the counter and thinking about nothing in particular, which is sometimes when things happen. The back door opened. She heard it. The specific sound of that particular door, she knew all the sounds of the Bellwether, the way you know the sounds of a place you've spent years inside. The back door had a different sound from the front. It was heavier, and the hinges were slightly off, and when it opened, it made a sound that was halfway between a creak and a groan. She turned around. Dominic Russo was standing in the kitchen doorway. Her first thought was that he looked wrong in a way she couldn't immediately process. Then she processed it. His coat was dark with rain, but also with something else, a stain that started below his left ribs and spread downward in a way that had a specific, unmistakable quality. His face was bruised across the left cheekbone. There was a cut above his eyebrow that had dried. One hand was pressed against his side, and the other was against the doorframe, and he was standing with the careful, deliberate posture of a man who is concentrating very hard on staying upright. "Claire," he said. Just her name. Just that. She was across the room before she'd made a decision to move. "Sit down," she said. "Right now, sit down." She got him to one of the kitchen stools. He sat heavily. She grabbed the first aid kit from under the prep counter. Ray kept it stocked and current because Ray kept everything that mattered stocked and current, and she got his coat open and lifted the edge of his shirt. The wound was in his left side below the ribs. It was not the kind of wound she could treat with a first aid kit, and she knew it immediately, but it was also not immediately life-threatening. If he stayed still, and the bleeding was controlled, and those were the two things she could work with right now. "What happened?" she said, applying pressure. "Ambush," he said. The word came out flat like a report. 4 men, parking garage on Smallman. I got out because one of them hesitated. He paused. He won't hesitate again. "Were you followed here?" "No," he said. "I took a route that no. I'm certain." "How certain?" "Certain enough to come here and not anywhere else," he said. "This was the safest place." She looked up at him. His face was pale under the bruising, but his eyes were clear, which was good. His breathing was controlled, which was either good or the result of years of disciplined performance under pressure, possibly both. "Adrian," he said. The word dropped into the room like a stone. "He ordered it," Claire asked. "I was given an order," Dominic said. "From above him, men who have been waiting for me to finish becoming a liability. Adrian is in the same position I'm in. He cooperates with them, or he becomes the next problem to solve." He looked at her steadily. "He won't do it himself, but he can't stop it either, not from where he stands." "Does Rebecca know?" "She knows I was in the garage. I called in before I ran. She has agents en route, but I couldn't wait. The building was compromised." He shifted, and the pressure she was applying made him go very still for a moment. Then he continued, "I need you to use the number, the one Daniel gave you, now." "I already have it," she said. She called Rebecca Sloane's direct line with one hand while keeping pressure on the wound with the other. Rebecca answered on the first ring. Claire told her what she was looking at in 6 sentences: location, condition, approximate timeline of the attack, Dominic's statement about the garage. Rebecca's voice was professional and fast and completely free of the kind of alarm that would have slowed anything down. 20 minutes, Rebecca said. "Keep him still. Keep pressure on the wound. Don't open the front door for anyone who doesn't identify themselves as federal law enforcement with a badge held to the glass." "Understood," Claire said. She hung up. 20 minutes, she told Dominic. He nodded. "That's enough time," he said. "For most things." He said it in a way that made her look at him more carefully, and what she saw in his face was not the fear of a man facing physical danger. It was something older and more specific. It was the face of a man who had been doing a particular kind of accounting and had arrived at an answer he'd been avoiding. "You think Adrian is going to come here?" she said. "I think he has to," Dominic said, "because the men who gave him the order will want confirmation, and the only way he can give them confirmation without actually—" He stopped. "He's in an impossible position, and I put him there. 20 years ago, when I decided that what I was building was worth more than who I was building it with." The back door opened again. Ray walked in with both hands empty and read the room in approximately 1 second. He looked at Dominic. He looked at Claire. He looked at the first aid kit and the stained coat on the floor and the way Claire was positioned, and he did not waste time on any of the questions that were probably occurring to him. "What do you need?" he said to Claire. "Stay in the kitchen," she said. "And if anyone comes through the front door in the next 20 minutes who isn't federal law enforcement, I need you to get every customer out the back." "There are no customers," Ray said. "We're closed." "Then just stay," she said. "Please." Ray looked at Dominic one more time. Something passed between them. Not warmth, not hostility, but a kind of functional acknowledgement. Two people who had found themselves in the same situation through very different routes. "All right," Ray said, and stayed. 11 minutes had passed since she'd called Rebecca when the headlights appeared in the parking lot. Not one vehicle, 2. Claire saw them through the front windows. Dark, the kind of dark that isn't accidental. They pulled in at angles that were not the angles of people parking. They were the angles of people creating a perimeter. Dominic saw them too. He had gotten himself to the corner booth, which was the booth with the best sight lines, and he was sitting there with one hand still pressed to his side and the other flat on the table watching the parking lot with an expression she couldn't fully read. One door opened. Adrian stepped out. He was alone, which was either a statement or a strategy. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking at the diner, at the lights inside, at the shapes visible through the windows. Then he walked to the front door and pushed it open. He came in and stopped when he saw the two of them. Whatever he'd expected to find, this was not exactly it. His father in the corner booth, obviously injured with a waitress 3 feet away, watching him with an expression that Adrian had probably never seen directed at him before. Not fear, not submission. The particular kind of clear-eyed attention that comes from someone who has already made their decision and is simply waiting to see what happens next. "Dad," he said. It was the first word, not a strategy, not a position, just the word that came out first. Dominic looked at his son. "Come sit down," he said. "I can't," Adrian said. "You already walked through that door alone," Dominic said. "You already made a choice. Come sit down." Adrian's jaw tightened. He looked at Claire. "You called Sloan," he said. "Yes," Claire said. "How long?" "Agents are about 9 minutes out," she said. Adrian did the math. She watched him do it, watched him calculate what 9 minutes meant in terms of options and outcomes. Watched the calculation produce an answer he didn't want, and then watched him look at that answer anyway. He walked to the booth and sat across from his father. Up close, she could see what she'd glimpsed in the diner 3 weeks ago, the fear underneath the control. But there was something else tonight that hadn't been there before, something that looked in the harsh fluorescent light like exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, the other kind, the kind that comes from spending too long being something you've decided you have to be. "They're going to know I came in here alone," Adrian said. "I know," Dominic said. "They'll think I told you." "I know," Dominic said again. "So it doesn't matter whether I did or not," Adrian said. "The outcome is the same for me either way." "That's not true," Dominic said. "It matters to you. Whatever you decide in the next 9 minutes, you have to live with it. You've had to live with every decision you've made for the past 10 years, and I know what that costs. I put that cost on you. I built the life you've been living and handed it to you and called it a gift, and it wasn't." Adrian looked at his father. "Don't do that," he said, and his voice had changed. The professional surface of it had cracked in a way that Claire didn't think was performance. "Don't make this into a—" "I'm not making it into anything," Dominic said. "I'm telling you the truth. Probably later than I should have, but I'm telling you now. I spent your entire childhood teaching you that fear and respect are the same thing. That tenderness is a target. That the only way to protect yourself is to make sure everyone around you has more to lose than you do." He stopped. "And you became exactly what I trained you to become. And then I changed the rules. And that's not fair. I understand that. What I put you through for the last 3 decades is not fair." Adrian's expression was doing something complicated. Claire watched it with the focused care of someone who understands that the next 60 seconds might determine something irreversible. "You left me," Adrian said quietly. "You changed. You started talking to her and you started feeling things, and you stopped being what you were, and you left me standing in the middle of something I didn't build and don't know how to get out of." His voice was still controlled, but only just. "You don't get to apologize for making me what I am and then judge me for being it." "I'm not judging you," Dominic said. "Then what are you doing?" "I'm telling you that you have a nephew named Noah. He's 5 years old. Your sister left because she wanted him to grow up without learning that love always comes with a condition attached. He doesn't know you exist. He doesn't know I exist. And I have accepted that I may not live long enough to change that for myself. But you might." Adrian went very still. "Olivia has a son," Dominic continued, "who is growing up in a world where his family is simply absent, not dead, not explained, just gone, because the life we built was something she had to get far enough away from to protect him. You could be the person who changes that. Not today, not next year, but eventually, if you're on the right side of what happens in the next 9 minutes." Claire took one step forward, not dramatically. Just one step the way you move when you've decided that silence has done its work and something else is needed now. "Adrian," she said. He looked at her. His eyes were the eyes of a man standing at the edge of something he can't see the bottom of. "I know you think I made your father weak," she said. "I didn't. What I did was talk to him like he was a person, like his choices still had consequences that mattered, like it was possible that he wasn't finished being a human being." She held his gaze. "The same is true for you. Right now, in this moment, you are not finished." "You don't know me," Adrian said. "I know what you've done tonight," she said. "You came in here alone. You sat down across from a man you were sent here to confirm the death of, and you sat down across from him, and you called him Dad. You did that. Whatever happens next, you already did that." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his father. Something broke in his face. Not dramatically, not the way things break in movies with a sudden collapse. The way things break in real life, which is slowly and with a kind of terrible dignity, and in a way that everyone in the room pretends not to fully see, so the person breaking can maintain whatever they need to maintain. He reached into his jacket. Every muscle in Claire's body tensed. He produced his phone. He set it on the table face up and looked at his father and said, "What's the number?" Dominic looked at his son for a moment with an expression that Claire had never seen on his face before and would spend a long time afterward trying to find the right word for. The closest she could get was this. It was the expression of a man who had given up on something and then been given it back and doesn't quite trust that it's real yet. "Rebecca Sloan," Dominic said, "area code 412. And he recited the number. Outside from very far away, the first siren became audible. Adrian looked at the phone in his hand. He looked at the number on the screen. He looked at his father once more quickly, the way you look at something you've decided to stop pretending you don't care about. He pressed call. The moment he put the phone to his ear, the door from the parking lot opened. Two of the men from the vehicles outside, not all four too, the ones who had been sent to confirm. They read the room in 1 second, and the nearer one moved his hand toward his coat. "Don't," Dominic said. His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. The man stopped. Not because Dominic still commanded automatic obedience, because there was something in his voice that was different from the voice of command, something that carried weight without requiring fear. "There are cameras in this diner," Dominic said. "There are federal agents 45 seconds away. There is a man on that phone right now, speaking to a federal prosecutor who has been building this case for years, and you are standing in the middle of it." He looked at them steadily. "Whatever you have to gain from what you came here to do, it is not worth what it will cost you. Walk out, right now. Make a different choice while you still have one to make." The two men looked at each other. One of them looked at Adrian, who was speaking quietly into the phone, his back half turned, his voice too low to hear clearly. Whatever he saw in Adrian's posture told him what he needed to know about how this had gone. He looked back at Dominic, and then in a moment that Claire would think about for a long time afterward, in a moment she would try to explain to people and find she never quite had the right words for, he took a step back. Then another. Then he turned and the other man turned with him, and they went back through the door into the parking lot. The sirens were close now, very close. Ray appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had been there, Claire realized, for the past several minutes, standing just out of sight, listening. He looked at Dominic and then at Adrian and then at Claire. "You need anything," he said to Claire. She looked around the room, at Dominic in the corner booth with one hand pressed to his side and his eyes on his son. At Adrian still on the phone, shoulders different now from how they'd been when he walked in, not smaller but less armored. At the parking lot visible through the front windows where red and blue lights were beginning to paint the rain. "No," she said. "I think we're okay." The federal vehicles pulled into the lot 40 seconds later. Agents came through both doors simultaneously, the practiced, efficient movement of people who have done this many times in many different configurations and have long since stopped finding it remarkable. Rebecca Sloan came in through the front, which surprised Claire slightly. She'd expected Rebecca to stay at a remove to manage from outside. Instead, she walked in and went directly to Dominic and crouched beside the booth and said quietly and without preamble, "You made it." "I made it," Dominic said. She looked at his side. "We have a medic outside. Can you walk?" "I can walk," he said. She looked at Adrian, who had ended the phone call and was sitting with both hands on the table, which Claire understood was a deliberate choice, a gesture of transparency, of no sudden movements, of someone who had decided to be cooperative and was communicating it through every available channel. "Mr. Russo," Rebecca said to Adrian, "I understand you want to speak with me." "Yes," Adrian said. "Then let's go outside," she said. Adrian stood. He paused when he reached his father's side of the booth. He didn't say anything. He put one hand briefly on his father's shoulder, just for a second, the way you touch something you're not sure you're allowed to touch, and then he moved toward the door. Dominic watched him go. His face did the thing again, the thing that Claire didn't have a perfect word for, but it was close enough to the beginning of something that she decided not to look away from it. Rebecca stood and looked at Claire. "You did the right things tonight," she said. "Everything in the right order." "I had good instructions," Claire said. "He left good instructions," Rebecca said, and there was something in the way she said it, something that communicated the particular respect one professional has for another, that told Claire more about the relationship between Rebecca and Dominic than anything she'd heard in the previous weeks. Then Rebecca was moving again, talking into her radio, coordinating the controlled chaos of what had just become a major federal operation. Two agents helped Dominic to his feet. He stood steadier than she expected. He looked at Claire. He didn't say anything for a moment, and she waited because she'd learned that with him, the important things rarely came out immediately. "You stepped between us," he said. "When Adrian had the gun, you stepped between us." "I know," she said. "Why?" Claire thought about it, about the moment, about what it had felt like, not brave, not calculated, just the only thing that made sense at that particular second, given everything she knew about both of the people in that room. "Because he was going to make a decision he couldn't reverse," she said, "and he wasn't finished yet. Neither of you were." Dominic looked at her. "No," he said quietly. "We weren't." The agents began walking him toward the door. He went without resistance, without theater, without any of the bearing of the man who had walked into this diner 4 months ago and thrown a coffee cup at a wall to make a point. He walked like a man who was tired and injured and facing a set of consequences he had chosen deliberately, and who had just watched his son choose differently than he'd been trained to choose. He paused at the door. Not for long. He turned back just enough to look at Claire one last time. She nodded. He walked out into the red and blue lights and the rain, and the door swung shut behind him, and Claire stood alone in the bellwether diner, with the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the distant sound of radio communication, and the small, stubborn warmth of a room that had been through things and was still standing. Ray appeared beside her. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, which was enough. It had always been enough with Ray. After a while, Claire reached under the counter and picked up the dustpan and the broom, and she began sweeping up because the floor needed sweeping, and that was something she knew how to do, and right now it was enough to do the thing in front of her. The morning after the federal operation at the bellwether Pittsburgh woke up to news that moved through the city, the way significant news always moves through a city that has been waiting for it fast, and with the particular electricity of something that people had suspected for a long time and are now processing as confirmed fact. The arrests had begun before dawn. Not just the men from the parking lot, not just the associates who had ordered the ambush. The financial records that Dominic had been transferring to Rebecca Sloane's office over the preceding weeks, methodically, carefully, with the precision of a man who understood that the value of evidence lies entirely in its completeness. Those records had given federal prosecutors the architecture of something much larger than one crime boss in Pittsburgh. They had the names of executives. They had the names of city officials. They had transaction records showing the movement of money through shell companies and charitable accounts and construction contracts that had been awarded through processes that looked legitimate on the surface and were anything but underneath. Claire heard about the arrests on the radio driving to work at 6:30 in the morning. She sat in the parking lot of the bellwether for 4 minutes after turning off the engine, listening to the reporter describe what was happening in language that was necessarily incomplete because the reporter only had access to what the federal office had released, which was a carefully curated fraction of the whole. She knew more than the reporter knew. She knew the specific weight of what had led to this morning. She knew what it had cost. She got out of the car and went to work. Ray was already there. He had the grill going and coffee made, and he looked at her when she came in, the way he'd been looking at her since the night before, with a care that was not intrusive, but was unmistakably present, the way a person stands close to something fragile without touching it. "You sleep," he said. "Some," she said, which was true. She had slept from about 3 to 6, which was not enough, but was more than she'd expected. "Your mother. She doesn't know the full extent of what happened," Claire said. "She knows it resolved. She knows everyone's okay." She poured herself a coffee and held the cup with both hands. "I'll tell her more when I know more." "What do you know?" Ray asked. "I know Dominic is in custody," she said. "Federal protective custody, which is different from arrested, but also not freedom. I know Adrian surrendered voluntarily. I know Rebecca Sloane's office is executing a much larger operation than just the two of them." She paused. "I know that the men who ordered the ambush are being picked up this morning." She looked at her coffee. "And I know that whatever happens next, the trial, the sentencing, all of it is going to take a long time. And Dominic is not going to come out of it as anything recognizable from what he was." Ray was quiet for a moment. "Is that bad?" Claire thought about it with the honest care it deserved. "No," she said. "I don't think it is." The first week after the operation was the strangest week of Claire's life, which was a significant claim given the company it was keeping. The diner became briefly famous in the way that ordinary places become famous when they are adjacent to extraordinary events. News vans parked outside for 2 days. A reporter knocked on the door asking for a statement, which Claire declined with the same directness she applied to most things. Ray put a handwritten sign on the door that said simply, "We're open. Please come in for coffee and leave the cameras outside." It worked better than she expected. Walter came in on Wednesday morning. He sat in the corner booth, the booth that had started everything on a rainy Tuesday night that felt simultaneously like yesterday and like something from a different chapter of her life entirely, and he ordered his usual, and he looked at Claire across the room with the particular look of an old man who has lived long enough to see several things come full circle. "I heard what happened," he said when she brought his coffee. "Some of it's accurate," she said. "Some of it's not." "The part about you," he said, "standing between a man and his son." She set the coffee down. "Yeah, that part's accurate." Walter wrapped both hands around the cup. "You know what I thought that first night when you told that man to say it again? What did you think?" "I thought that woman is either the bravest person I've ever seen, or she doesn't fully understand what she's standing in front of," Walter said. "And then I decided it didn't matter which one, because the outcome was the same either way." Claire looked at him. "Which was?" "She stood up," Walter said simply. She thought about that for the rest of the shift. Daniel Ward called her at 2 in the afternoon on Thursday, with the particular precision of a man who times his calls to when he believes people are available. She stepped into the break room and closed the door. "There are some things I can tell you and some things I can't," Daniel said by way of opening. "The things I can tell you, Dominic and Adrian are both in protective custody and cooperating fully. The scope of what they're providing is larger than what Rebecca's office anticipated. We are talking about a network that goes significantly beyond Pittsburgh construction contracts, medical billing fraud, municipal corruption across 4 counties. The testimony they're offering is going to result in prosecutions that will take years to complete." "And the things you can't tell me," Claire said. "Where they are," Daniel said. "How long the process will take. What the sentencing recommendations will look like." A pause. "Dominic asked me to convey something to you." Claire was quiet. "He asked me to tell you that he's not going to contact you directly," Daniel said. "Not because he doesn't want to, but because any contact with you would draw attention to you in ways that he's not willing to do. The people who are being implicated in this investigation include individuals who will be looking for pressure points. He doesn't want you to be one." "That's his choice to make," Claire said. "He said you'd say that," Daniel said, and there was something in his voice that might have been the closest he came to warmth. "He also said to tell you that it's the first genuinely selfless decision he's confident he's made in about 30 years, and that he'd appreciate it if you'd let him have it." Claire sat with that for a moment. The break room was small and smelled like old coffee and the particular institutional cleaning product that had probably been purchased in the same bulk order for the past decade. Through the door, she could hear the diner doing its ordinary work, the clink of plates. Ray's voice giving an order the bell over the front door. "There's something else," Daniel said. "Okay," she said. Before Dominic went into custody, he prepared a document, Daniel said. He asked me to give it to you when the time was appropriate. I believe the time is now. What kind of document? A letter, Daniel said, and an attachment. He came to the diner the following morning. Daniel Ward in person turned out to be a man in his late 50s, with the kind of face that suggests a long career of listening carefully to difficult things without allowing them to break him, not untouched, but intact. He sat at the counter, declined coffee politely, and placed an envelope on the counter between them. Claire looked at it. He wrote it himself, Daniel said. I witnessed the signature. The attachment is a legal instrument protecting the independence of the Harbor Light Medical Foundation in the event of asset seizure. He worked with 3 separate attorneys to make sure it was airtight before he surrendered. Claire looked at the envelope for another moment. Then she picked it up. The letter inside was handwritten on plain paper. Dominic had the handwriting of a man who had been taught penmanship in school and had retained it careful, slightly formal, with the occasional word where the pen had pressed harder than necessary, the way handwriting does when the person writing is concentrating on something beyond the physical act. She read it in the break room alone. He did not ask for forgiveness in the letter. She noticed that first. He did not catalog his changes or request that she think of him differently than the evidence warranted. He wrote about the Harbor Light Foundation, about what he had done to protect it, and why about the independent board structure he'd spent the past 6 weeks reinforcing through legitimate legal channels so that the removal of his assets from its funding base would not collapse it. He wrote about the families it served. He wrote that it needed someone who understood from the inside what it meant to fight an uncaring system with insufficient resources and the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting that fight, while also working double shifts and caring for someone you love. He wrote that he had recommended her for a patient advocacy position with the foundation, that the recommendation had been made through proper channels and carried no obligation and would be evaluated on its merits by people who had no knowledge of who he was to her or she was to him. Then at the bottom of the letter in handwriting that pressed slightly harder than the rest, you were the first person in more than 20 years who looked at me and reacted to the man rather than the name. I don't know what I would have become without that. I suspect I know what I wouldn't have. You told me you didn't save me. I believe you believe that. But I want you to know what actually happened from where I was standing. You told me the truth. Every time. Without softening it and without weaponizing it. You just told me what you saw. And it turned out that was the thing I had been most desperate for and most afraid of for longer than I can calculate. That is not a small thing. I think you know that. I hope you let yourself know it. She sat with the letter for a long time. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and went back out to finish her shift. She called the Harbor Light Foundation that afternoon and spoke to a woman named Patricia Okafor, who ran the Patient Services Division and who spoke about the work with the specific combination of weariness and commitment that Claire recognized immediately as the signature of someone doing a job they believe in under conditions that are consistently harder than they should be. Patricia explained the position, the caseload, the responsibilities, the skills it required, the ways in which it differed from the kind of advocacy Claire had been doing informally for years on behalf of customers she'd watched struggle with the same systems. "Can I ask how you heard about us?" Patricia said. Claire thought about how to answer that. "Someone told me you were the real thing," she said. "I verified it independently, and they were right." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can you come in next week?" The hardest conversation of the entire period was not with Daniel Ward, and it was not reading Dominic's letter, and it was not the moment she'd decided to step between Adrian and his father in the diner. The hardest conversation was with Helen 3 days after the operation, when Claire finally sat down and told her mother the full story from the beginning. Not the abbreviated version. The whole thing, starting from the rainy Tuesday night, the coffee cup, the $5 bill, and working forward through every conversation, every revelation, every decision, every moment of doubt and clarity and fear and stubbornness, all the way through to the night in the diner when federal sirens cut through the rain and 2 men who had been father and son in name but strangers in practice finally stood in the same place, choosing the same direction. Helen listened without interrupting. When Claire finished, Helen was quiet for so long that Claire began to wonder what she was going to say, began to prepare herself for the version of the conversation where her mother was frightened or angry or both. Then Helen said, "You know what your grandmother used to say?" "Which thing?" Claire said. because Helen's mother had said many things, most of them worth repeating. She said that the people who change are the most important people in any story, Helen said. Not the ones who are always good. Anyone can be always good if circumstances cooperate. The ones who change, they're the ones who prove that change is possible at all. And that is not a small service to the rest of us. Claire looked at her mother. He's not a good man, she said. He did real harm to a lot of people. That doesn't disappear. No, Helen agreed. It doesn't disappear, but it can be answered for, and apparently he's doing that. She paused. And you stood in front of a gun. I stood in front of a man holding a gun, Claire corrected. There's a difference. Is there? He wasn't going to fire it, Claire said. I was fairly confident. Helen gave her a look that communicated with the efficiency of 32 years of motherhood exactly what she thought of the phrase fairly confident in this context. I knew what I was seeing, Claire said. I knew what Adrian needed in that moment. I knew that his father couldn't give it to him because there was too much history between them, and I knew that if I didn't step in the moment was going to close. How did you know? Helen asked. Claire thought about it, genuinely thought about it with the care the question deserved. Because I've been watching people for 32 years, she said, from behind a counter, watching them eat alone and together, watching them argue and apologize, watching them be brave in small ways and cowardly in small ways, watching what fear looks like on a face and what a decision looks like just before someone makes it. She paused. I knew what I was looking at. Helen reached over and took her hand. Yes, she said. You did. The interview with the Harbor Light Foundation took place on a Tuesday morning, which felt appropriate in a way that Claire chose not to make too much of. Patricia Okafor turned out to be a woman in her late 40s with the kind of organized, purposeful energy that Claire recognized as the particular efficiency of someone who has learned to do more with less, because that is perpetually what the situation requires. The office was small, and the caseload was large, and the resources were never quite enough, which was not a surprise. Patricia walked her through 5 cases in the first hour of the meeting. Not hypothetical cases. Real families, real situations, real insurance denials, real hospital bills. She described what the advocacy role involved with a frankness that made it clear she was not selling the position so much as making sure whoever took it understood what they were actually agreeing to. We need someone who won't be worn down by the system saying no, Patricia said. Because the system will say no, repeatedly, with great confidence and extensive documentation. We need someone who can receive a no and then find the next question to ask, and then ask it, and then ask the next one after that. Claire looked at her. I've been doing that for 2 years on behalf of my mother, she said. Through the insurance appeals process, through hospital billing departments, through 3 different state assistance programs. I know how to read a denial letter and find the specific language that creates the opening for the next appeal. I know how to be persistent without being hostile, because hostile gets you transferred to a different department and then you lose the progress you've made. She paused. I also know what it feels like to be the person on the other side of the desk, the one who has done everything right and is still about to lose something she can't replace. I know what that person needs to hear and what she doesn't, and I know the difference between comfort that helps and comfort that just makes the person delivering it feel better. Patricia looked at her for a moment. When can you start? She said. Claire gave the bellwether 2 weeks' notice. Ray's response when she told him was to be quiet for approximately 30 seconds and then say, good. And then he went back to the grill. And then he came back out 2 minutes later and said, I'm proud of you, in the tone of a man who does not say that kind of thing frequently and is aware of the weight of it. And then he went back to the grill again. Her last shift at the bellwether was on a Friday. Tessa Morgan, who had worked the other side of the counter from Claire for 6 years and who operated primarily in a register of cheerful practicality that had occasionally driven Claire slightly crazy and had always fundamentally sustained her, cried at the end of the shift, which made Claire cry, which made Ray make an expression of exaggerated stoicism that fooled no one. The regulars had come in the couple from booth 6, who tipped exactly 15% the Wednesday morning veterans who argued about baseball, the night shift nurse who always ordered scrambled eggs. Walter was there. He sat in the corner booth and ate his toast, and when Claire came over at the end of the night, he stood up. He was a tall man when he stood up straight, which he rarely did, and he looked at her with the specific clear-eyed quality of someone who has seen many things end and understands that endings are not the same as failures. "You going to be okay?" he said. "Yeah," she said. "I think so." "What are you going to do?" She told him about the foundation, about the cases, about Patricia Okafor and the denial letters, and the families sitting in offices with medical records and unopened bills waiting for someone to tell them that the fight was not over. Walter nodded slowly. "That's right," he said. "That's exactly right." She hugged him. He let her, which was notable because Walter was not generally a person who let people hug him. When she got home that night, Helen was awake and waiting, which was exactly what Claire had expected. They sat at the kitchen table with tea, and Helen asked about the shift, and Claire told her, and then they were quiet together for a while, which was something they had always been good at. "He wrote you a letter," Helen said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Can I ask what it said?" Claire thought about it, about the handwriting that pressed harder on certain words, about the phrase that had stayed with her most clearly, the one about telling the truth without softening it and without weaponizing it. "He said I told him the truth," she said. "He said that was what he needed and what he was afraid of at the same time, and that it turned out to be the thing that changed what was possible for him." Helen was quiet for a moment. "What do you think about that?" Helen asked. Claire held her tea with both hands. "I think that's what dignity looks like," she said. "When it's offered to someone who's forgotten they're entitled to it. It doesn't feel like a big thing when you're doing it. It just feels like being unwilling to pretend." She paused. "But apparently the not pretending matters more than you think when you're in the middle of it." Helen reached across the table and covered Claire's hand. "Your grandmother would have liked you," she said. "She raised you," Claire said, "so I think that follows." Helen smiled. It was the smile Claire had been looking at her whole life, the one that had been there through every version of hard and every version of good steady, in a way that had nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with character. Claire thought about the letter in the drawer upstairs, about the broken coffee cup in the small box she'd kept, not as a trophy, not as a monument, but as a reminder of the moment. She'd stopped pretending that smallness was the appropriate response to being told to shrink. She thought about Dominic Russo in protective custody, somewhere in a city or state she didn't know, surrounded by people she'd never meet, facing a legal process that would unfold over years, and at the end of which he would emerge into a life that looked nothing like the one he'd spent 3 decades building. She thought about whether that was tragedy or justice or both, and she decided it was both, and that both things could be true simultaneously without one canceling out the other. She thought about Adrian, who had called a federal prosecutor from a corner booth in the Bellwether Diner, and in doing so had made the specific choice that every subsequent choice in his life would now have to build on the first genuinely free decision he might ever have made, and the most costly. She thought about Olivia somewhere living under a name that had carried her far enough away from her family to protect her son. She thought about what it would mean for a letter to arrive, for communication to begin, for forgiveness, which was not the same as reconciliation, and reconciliation, which was not the same as the erasure of what had happened to become not certain, not guaranteed, but possible, a direction rather than a destination. She thought about Walter finishing his toast in the corner booth. She thought about Helen's treatment, about the specialist's careful professional optimism, about the phrase significant stabilization that had become the most beautiful phrase in the English language over the course of a single phone call. She thought about Patricia Okafor saying, "When can you start?" and meaning it. She thought about all the things she had not known on a rainy Tuesday night 4 months ago when she set down a coffee pot on a laminate counter and looked a dangerous man directly in the eyes and told him to say that one more time. She had not known what would happen next. She had not known what she was starting. She had not known who he was capable of becoming, or who Adrian was capable of choosing to be, or what it would cost any of them, or what it would make possible on the other side of the cost. She had only known that she was done pretending, and it turned out that was enough to start. She finished her tea. She said goodnight to her mother. She went upstairs and got into bed and lay in the dark, and thought that Monday morning was 4 days away, and she had a new job beginning and cases to prepare for, and families to fight for, and the darkness outside her window was the ordinary darkness of a city going about its ordinary business, with no unfamiliar cars in the lot and no sirens in the distance. Just Pittsburgh, just the night, just the work that was waiting. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, she slept without counting hours. 1 year is long enough to know whether something is real. Claire had learned that in the way you learn most important things, not from a book, not from a conversation, but from the specific accumulation of days that don't announce themselves as significant and turn out to be exactly that. 1 year of walking into the Harbor Light Foundation offices at 8 in the morning and walking out at 6 in the evening, and sometimes not walking out until 8 because a family's appeal deadline was the following morning and the paperwork wasn't finished, and she was not the kind of person who left paperwork unfinished when someone's life was attached to it. 1 year of sitting across desks from people who were holding their fear in both hands like something they were afraid to put down. 1 year of learning that advocacy is not a skill you acquire and then possess. It is a practice. It requires the same attention every single time for every single case, because every single family sitting across from you believes correctly that their situation is the most important situation in the room, and they are right, and you have to hold that truth while simultaneously managing 17 other cases that are equally true. Patricia Okafor had told her this in the first week. She had said it plainly the way she said most things without softening it into something more comfortable than it was. "You will get tired," Patricia said. "That is not a failure. That is the cost of doing this work with your whole self instead of the part of yourself that knows how to go through motions. The question is not whether you get tired. The question is what you do with the tired." Claire had written that down. She kept it on a note card at the corner of her desk where she could see it on the days when the tired was very loud. The cases came in a steady stream that never fully slowed. A retired schoolteacher in her 60s, whose insurance company had denied a cardiac procedure on the grounds that her age made the long-term benefit insufficient to justify the cost language, so nakedly transactional that Claire had to read it twice to confirm she'd understood it correctly. A young father working 2 jobs whose wife needed a specialized oncology treatment that wasn't covered under his plan because the hospital that offered it was 12 miles outside his network boundary. A woman named Gloria Reyes, who had been fighting the same denial for 14 months before she found Harbor Light, who arrived in Claire's office holding a folder so thick with correspondence that it required both hands, who sat down and said, "I've done everything they asked, every single thing, and they keep saying no," and whose voice carried the particular quality of a person who is very close to the edge of believing that the system is not broken, but is working exactly as designed, which is sometimes the most accurate and most devastating conclusion. Claire looked at Gloria's folder. She looked at Gloria. "Okay," she said. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything in order. We're going to find the opening." Gloria looked at her. "You think there is one?" "There's always an opening," Claire said. "The system is designed to make you believe there isn't. That's the strategy. You get tired and you stop looking. We don't stop looking." They worked Gloria's case for 3 weeks. Claire found the opening on a Tuesday afternoon, a procedural inconsistency in the third denial letter that contradicted language in the plan's own coverage documentation, a discrepancy small enough that it required careful reading and specific knowledge to identify, but large enough once identified to form the basis of an appeal that the insurance company's internal review board could not dismiss on the grounds they'd used the previous 3 times. She filed the appeal with a 47-page supporting document that she'd built from the ground up, cross-referencing the plan documentation with clinical literature and 2 previous rulings from similar cases in Pennsylvania that had gone in the patient's favor. The approval came back in 11 days. Gloria called her when she got the letter. She didn't say much. She said Claire's name, and then she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Thank you." And the way she said it contained everything that a person puts into a phrase, when the phrase has to carry the weight of something enormous, and there are no bigger words available. Claire said, "You did this. You kept fighting for 14 months before you ever found us. I just found the door that was already there." "You showed me it was there," Gloria said. "That's the job," Claire said, and she meant it. That was the job, not heroism, not drama, just the patient, relentless work of showing people that the door exists when every mechanism of the system has been arranged to make them believe otherwise. Helen came to the foundation twice a week. This had begun 3 months into Claire's tenure, when Helen had mentioned with the careful casualness of a woman proposing something she wants to do, but is aware she has no standing to demand that she had some time on her hands, and the waiting room of the foundation seemed like a place where time could be used well. Claire had taken approximately 4 seconds to say yes, and Patricia had taken approximately 2, and Helen had been coming in on Tuesdays and Thursdays ever since. What Helen did in the waiting room was not officially categorized as anything. She sat. She was available. She talked to people who were waiting sometimes about their cases, but more often about other things. The kind of things that people need to talk about when they are sitting in a waiting room carrying something heavy, and the weight of it is not only medical or financial, but also the particular loneliness of feeling like the world is moving forward and you have somehow gotten stuck in place. A man named Jerome, who was there waiting for his wife's appointment with Patricia, told Helen about his time in Korea. Helen told him about raising Claire alone after Claire's father left when Claire was 7. They talked for 40 minutes. When Patricia called Jerome's name, he stood up straighter than he'd been sitting when he came in, which was not nothing. Claire watched this from across the room and thought about the way some people carry warmth, the way other people carry tools, not as an accessory, but as the fundamental instrument of how they move through the world. It was Daniel Ward who called her on a Thursday morning in the 10th month with the particular precision that she had come to associate with news that required the kind of delivery that doesn't work by text. "I have something to tell you," he said. "2 things, actually." "Okay," she said. "The first is that the sentencing phase has begun," Daniel said. "It's not public yet. The full proceedings are still under seal because of the ongoing prosecutions of the other parties. But I can tell you that both Dominic and Adrian have received preliminary recommendations that reflect the scope and value of their cooperation." "What does that mean?" Claire asked. "It means the prosecutors have gone to the judge and said that without the testimony and documentation, these 2 men provided a significant portion of this case collapses," Daniel said. "It means the judge is being asked to weigh accountability against cooperation, in a case where the cooperation has been by any measure extraordinary." He paused. "It means that they are going to face real consequences, significant ones, but they are likely to face them with their lives intact and with the possibility of a future that is not entirely defined by the past." Claire was quiet for a moment. "And the second thing," she said. Daniel was quiet for just long enough that she knew the second thing was larger than the first. "Olivia Russo, she goes by Olivia Carver, now made contact," he said, "through federal channels. She read about the operation. She's been watching the case from a distance for 10 months trying to decide what she wanted to do with what she knew." Another pause. "She's agreed to exchange letters, with both of them. Through the federal liaison supervised no direct contact for now." Claire sat down. She was standing in the break room of the foundation, and she sat down on the small chair by the window without quite deciding to. "She has a son," Claire said. "Noah." "She does," Daniel said. "And she hasn't made any decisions about what Noah will eventually know or not know, but she has decided that silence isn't the same as safety, and that her brother made a choice in a diner on a rainy night that she felt deserved a response." Claire thought about that, about a woman somewhere building a life under a different name, watching from a distance, reading court documents and news articles, and trying to determine whether the people she'd run from had become people she could afford to respond to. "Did Dominic know this was happening?" Claire asked. "He found out this morning," Daniel said. "I'm told he asked to be left alone for about 20 minutes. Claire thought about a 58-year-old man in protective custody, sitting alone with the news that his daughter had decided to write him a letter. She thought about what 20 minutes of that kind of quiet might feel like. "Good," she said. And then, because it was true, and she wanted to say it directly, "I'm glad." "So is he," Daniel said. "He asked me to tell you something." "What?" "He said you told me that earning trust cannot be rushed or purchased. He said he's trying to remember that every day. He said some days it's harder than others." "Tell him," Claire said carefully, "that that's how it's supposed to feel. If it were easy, it wouldn't mean anything." Daniel said he would. After she hung up, she sat in the break room for a few minutes. She thought about the letter in the drawer at home, about the handwriting that had pressed harder on certain words, about what it must feel like to receive a letter from the daughter you drove away, and understand that the letter represents a step taken entirely on the other person's terms, not yours, and that receiving it means accepting that it may be the only step for a very long time, and that patience is the only currency you have left. She thought that was probably the hardest lesson Dominic Russo had ever had to learn. And she thought that learning it finally at 58, with everything it had cost to get to the point where learning it was even possible, was not nothing. It was not erasure. It was not absolution. But it was real. She went back to work. The case that walked through her office door that afternoon arrived in the shape of a man named David Park, who was 41 years old, and sat down across from her with the particular posture of someone who has spent a significant amount of time apologizing for taking up space. How was a single father. His wife had died 14 months ago. His daughter Maya was 9, and Maya had been diagnosed 6 months ago with a rare autoimmune condition that responded to a biologic treatment that David's insurance classified as experimental and had denied 3 times. He set his folder on the desk and said, "I'm sorry to take up your time. I know you probably have more important cases." Claire looked at him. She looked at the folder. She thought about the words "more important cases" and what they revealed about how long a person has been fighting something alone, long enough to start believing that their situation is less than what it actually is, less urgent, less worthy, because that belief is easier to carry than the alternative. She thought about a rainy Tuesday night and a cup of coffee, and a moment where the only choice was whether to make herself small. She leaned forward. "Mr. Park," she said, "look at me." He looked up. "Your daughter's case is the most important case in this room right now," she said, "and I need you to stop apologizing for being here. You did everything you were supposed to do. You fought through 3 denials. You found us. That is not a failure. That is exactly what fighting looks like. And no one in this office needs you to be sorry for fighting." David Park looked at her for a moment, with the expression of a man who has been braced for a particular kind of response and has received something entirely different and is not yet sure what to do with it. His jaw tightened. His eyes went bright in the way that eyes go bright when someone has been holding something back for a long time and has suddenly been given permission to stop holding it. "I just need someone to tell me there's still a way," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. He caught it, steadied, pressed forward. "I have told Maya that we're fighting. I have told her every week that we're still fighting, and I need to be able to keep telling her that." Claire opened his folder. She read for 4 minutes without speaking. David sat across from her and let her read, and the room was quiet except for the sound of pages turning. Then she picked up her pen. "There's a way," she said. The 3rd denial letter, they used a cost-effectiveness standard that contradicts the coverage terms in your plan for pediatric patients. It's a narrow contradiction, but it's real and it's documented, and it's the opening we need. She was already writing. "We're going to build the appeal around that contradiction, plus clinical documentation of Maya's specific response to the treatment. I need you to get me her last 3 months of lab work and the specialist's notes. Can you do that by Monday?" David was leaning forward now. His hands were on the desk. "Yes," he said. "Absolutely yes." "Monday morning," she said. "Bring everything. We'll go through it together." He stood when the appointment ended. He picked up his folder, and then he stopped at the door. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure," Claire said. "How do you do this every day?" he said. "How do you sit across from people in the worst situations of their lives and how do you keep believing it's possible?" Claire looked at him. She thought about everything she could say, about all the answers that were true and accurate and would take longer than this moment had room for. She settled on the one that was most true. "Because I've seen it work," she said. "I've seen people who were completely out of options find the one door that was still open. I've seen people who had been told no so many times they'd stop believing in yes, come back and tell me what happened when the answer changed." She paused. "And I've seen people who had spent their entire lives making other people afraid decide at the last possible moment to choose something different. So I know that change is real. I know it happens. And that makes it impossible to stop looking for it." Bye. David Park nodded. He looked at her the way people look at someone who has just said something they're going to remember. Then he left, and she went back to work. The news about the broader sentencing broke publicly 4 weeks later. It ran on every local station and made the front page of the Post-Gazette and generated the kind of coverage that surfaces every few years when a story turns out to be larger than the city that contains it. Executives from 3 construction companies, 2 city council members, a hospital administrator who had diverted charitable healthcare funds, a network that had been operating in various configurations for more than 2 decades. The names of Dominic and Adrian Russo appeared in the reporting as they had to. Their cooperation was described. The extent of what they had provided was summarized in language that was accurate but necessarily incomplete, the way journalism about ongoing legal proceedings always is. They were not heroes in the coverage. They were not redeemed. They were accurately described as men who had been part of the system they helped expose, which was the truth, and the truth was the appropriate frame. Claire read the coverage on her phone during her lunch break. She didn't say anything to anyone about it. She didn't need to. What she knew about those names and that story was not the version available to the public, and the version available to the public was sufficient for the public's purposes. Her version was her own. She put her phone away and finished her lunch and went back to David Park's file. The approval for Maya's treatment came on a Wednesday morning 6 weeks after David Park first sat down across from her desk. He called her at 8:47 before she'd finished her first coffee, and she knew from the first sound he made what the answer was. He said her name, then he said Maya's name, then he said she starts treatment next week, and the way he said it, the specific compression of 14 months of fighting and fear, and the particular bravery required to keep telling your 9-year-old daughter that you are still fighting when you are terrified the fight is already lost. All of it was inside those 6 words, and Claire held the phone and let it be there. "Good," she said. "Tell Maya she was the whole reason." "She doesn't know about all of this," David said. "The appeal's the all of it. She knows we were fighting. She doesn't know the details." "That's okay," Claire said. "She knows her dad didn't stop. That's the part she'll carry." A beat of silence. "Thank you," David said. "Monday morning," Claire said. 8 o'clock. "I've got a new case, and I need your opinion on something." And because he laughed, surprised and genuine and human, she knew he understood what she was doing, which was telling him that the work continued, and he was part of it now, that people who have been through a fight have a particular kind of knowledge that belongs in the room where the next fight is being prepared. The twist that Claire had not fully anticipated, the one that arrived quietly and without announcement on a Thursday afternoon in the 11th month, was a phone call from Daniel Ward that began with his usual precision and ended with something she hadn't been expecting. "Olivia Carver has written back," Daniel said. "To both of them. 3 letters total, 1 to Dominic, 1 to Adrian, and 1 that she's asked to be forwarded to you." Claire was quiet. "To me," she said. "To you," Daniel confirmed. "She doesn't know me." "She knows who you are," Daniel said. "She's read everything publicly available about the operation. She knows you were there, and she asked to write to you specifically." He paused. "She said she wanted to thank the person who was in the room when her family decided to stop." The letter arrived through the same federal channels as everything else in this story, carefully officially, in an envelope that had been processed and documented, and was therefore as real as anything could be. It was shorter than Claire expected. Olivia Carver wrote in a direct, clear hand that communicated someone who had thought carefully about every word and had removed the ones that weren't necessary. She wrote that she had left Pittsburgh 8 years ago because staying felt like consent. She wrote that she had not hated her father or her brother. She had been afraid of what staying near them would teach her son about the world. She wrote that she had spent 8 years wondering whether she had made the right choice or simply the survivable one, and that those were not always the same thing, and that she had learned to live with not knowing. She wrote that reading about what happened in the diner, the details that had come out in reporting and in the federal filings that were public record, had made her sit in her kitchen for a long time, thinking about the specific quality of courage required to tell the truth to someone who has every structural reason to punish you for it. She wrote, "I don't know if my father can become someone Noah is safe to know. I don't know if I can forgive what was built. But I know that someone who had no obligation to any of us chose to treat my father like a human being at the exact moment that mattered most, and I wanted to say that I see that, and that it changed what was possible, and that I'm grateful." She signed it with her full name, Olivia Carver, not Russo, but not hidden. Claire sat with the letter for a long time. Then she folded it and put it in the same place as Dominic's letter, in the small box in her desk drawer that also held, wrapped in a piece of soft cloth, the handle of a broken coffee cup from a rainy Tuesday night that she had picked up off the floor of the Bellwether diner and kept not as a relic, but as a reminder of the moment she had stopped being willing to pretend. Helen was healthy, not cured. The cardiologist was precise about that distinction, and Helen had absorbed it with the matter-of-fact practicality that characterized her approach to most things. But stable, improving. She came to the foundation on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and she sat in the waiting room and she talked to people who needed someone to talk to, and she went to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, and she had started a book club with 3 women from her old neighborhood, and she called Claire every evening at 7 to ask about the cases without asking for names because she understood that names were protected, and she was interested in the human shape of the work, not the identifying details. One evening Helen said, "Do you think about him?" Claire was at the kitchen table, and she didn't have to ask who. "Sometimes," she said. "What do you think about—" "I think about the oatmeal," Claire said. Helen waited. "I used to order oatmeal with brown sugar on the side," Claire said. "When he was trying to be ordinary, he sat at the counter and ate oatmeal, and it was so deliberate, like he was practicing." She paused. "I think about the fact that practicing was something he was willing to do. At 58, with everything he was carrying, he sat at a diner counter and practiced being a person, and I think that was one of the bravest things I ever watched anyone do, even though it looked like nothing from the outside." Helen was quiet for a moment. "You know what I think," Helen said. "What I think you were each other's practice," Helen said. "He practiced being human, and you practiced believing that change is real, and you both needed the practice, and you both showed up for it, and the world is different because you did." Claire looked at her mother. "That's a generous reading," she said. "It's an accurate reading," Helen said. "I was a librarian for 30 years. I know the difference." The last thing that happened, the thing that closed the year in a way that felt, if not like resolution, then like the honest shape of how things actually resolve, which is incompletely and imperfectly, and with more questions remaining than answers, was small. It was a morning in the 12th month, and Claire arrived at the foundation at 8 o'clock and found Patricia Okafor already there, which was not unusual, and a new case file on her desk, which was also not unusual. What was unusual was the note on top of the file in Patricia's handwriting that said simply, "This one is yours. You'll know why." The file was a family. A grandmother, 64, raising her 2 grandchildren alone. A denied claim for a cardiac treatment. A system that had said no twice and was counting on the 3rd no to be the final one. Claire sat down. She opened the file. She read. She picked up her pen. She began. Because the work was the answer. Not to everything, not to the questions that would take years to resolve, not to the silence that kept people alive, and the communication that was beginning, letter by letter through federal channels between people who had not spoken for 8 years. Not to the accounting that Dominic and Adrian were working through in courts and in their own minds with the specific sustained effort that genuine accountability requires. Not to Noah, who was 5 and did not know his grandfather's name, and would one day have to decide what to do with the knowledge when it came. The work was the answer to the question in front of her, and the question in front of her was always a family, a file, a denial, a door that looked closed and wasn't. That was enough. That was the whole job. Show up, open the file, find the door. And Claire Bennett, who had learned courage not from being fearless, but from being too tired to keep pretending that fear was a reason to stay small, who had looked a dangerous man in the eyes in a diner on a rainy Tuesday night and told him the truth and kept telling it until the truth changed. What was possible, opened the file and found the door, and walked through it, and did not stop.